you think this is starting to wear on me? You've been raining down like hail. I'm weak. I have tried to give you my soul, but you can't love something you own. It's too late to repair what we made. What can I do? Time flashed by and I woke up on the other side of the moon.
G'day everybody and welcome to my channel. I'm Anna and this is You Got Me in Stitches. Also today it is Tip Time Tuesday. For those of you recently joining my channel and are new to sewing, I come in with you each and every Tuesday with a few little tips and tricks just to help perhaps new sewists along the beginning of their sewing journey. Today I'm coming in at you guys with scrunch, so scrunchy fabric and tissue paper versus smooth tissue paper and smooth fabric. Now what can this mean? Okay, let's go and find out. If you are really new to sewing and are a little bit further along your journey, it depends where you are at whether you trace your patterns out or not. If you purchase patterns from the big companies and or indie patterns, do you trace out or do you actually cut in to the tissue paper and or the fresh PDF paper? You can also trace out your PDFs as well, and sometimes it also depends on how we style them. Sometimes we roll our patterns up that we have traced out and or our PDFs, whether we've traced them out or not. And with the tissue in the big pattern companies, sometimes, for the most part, you can never get the tissue paper back into the envelope the way that it originally came out, unless you are meticulous and you do like pressing the tissue. And that is what we are going to, well, I'm going to show you guys today. And it is versing each other. Sometimes we lay our pattern pieces, whether it's tissue and or our traced out or our PDF paper. The paper is much thicker than the regular tissue paper that you find in some of the patterns. Now, we are a little bit guilty of this. Sometimes we have really lovely smooth patterns and we place them on fabric that is a little bit crinkly, and sometimes we don't always press our fabric, or sometimes the other way around. Sometimes in the early part of my sewing I would just kind of hand smooth the tissue paper and or paper that I had used to trace out the original pattern from, and just hope that it will lay pretty flat. But also I think experience and as time goes on we kind of realise that sometimes we do need the fabric to be flat and also the pattern, because it makes a difference in the sizing of perhaps the final garment. Now we may only be talking a couple of mil here and there, but it does make a big difference. And also if you are, say for instance, chalk lining on your fabric around your pattern, the thickness of the chalk also dictates how large and or small you're cutting out of the fabric. So when you have your fabric pieces already cut out, if you actually place your scissors on, say, your marked line, whether it's chalk, I say chalk because chalk is a little bit thicker than perhaps pin, and if you still see the chalk lines, that actual fabric and that you've cut out that pattern piece is just a little fraction bigger than your pattern piece. And it is a good judgment to perhaps learn early on is when you cut your traced out lines on your fabric from your pattern pieces, is to place the blade of the scissor along the edge, so when you cut along the edge of the traced out line you're actually cutting them away, and then therefore it doesn't add a little bit of extra fabric all around the entirety of the pattern piece, and this is not too dissimilar with scrunchy tissue and or thicker paper. When we lay it down on our beautiful fabrics, that also sometimes dictates the kind of, especially with slippery fabrics, if you lay things down, if it moves, and the pattern weights or pins or whatever you like to use, if it doesn't lay flat and smooth, that also distorts the pattern pieces. So today I am going to demonstrate, and this is just for demonstration purposes, versus the smooth fabric and the smooth pattern piece. Now whether it's the tissue or the traced out paper, also traced out paper, it depends on what you guys use. We are all different, so although this is just for demonstration, just bear in mind that everybody uses different paper, different thicknesses and kind of their malleable movement. Some paper is very stiff and rigid, whilst others are a little bit more supple and you can move around with them. Also then we're going to do the scrunch with the tissue and or traced out paper and scrunched fabric and see how we get on. Okay, I am going to turn the camera around and then you guys can see me at my pressing station or ironing board and see how we get on with the scrunch and smooth test. Let's go. Right, just for demonstration purposes, I have two creased fabrics and they are the same weight. This one is 100% cotton, whilst this one is a pure linen. Both of them can withstand quite hot temperatures with the iron, but I would recommend perhaps you starting off with a cool to medium heat and gradually build up the heat. I am going to press the gingham one. I have set my heat temperature setting to about 3/4, as I've already used this fabric and pressed this fabric, so I know already that it is quite happy to have a high heat on it. I also have the steam on, so if you see the steam come out a little bit there, that is okay. I also like to flip the fabric over and press it, and if for whatever reason there are a couple of little stubborn creases there, if your iron has the option to squirt water, which is what I'm doing there, you can get those stubborn little creases out. Turn that back over and we have a really good piece of pressed fabric. Also, if you trace your patterns out, which for the most part I do, and I have this brown recycled paper here, there is numerous different types of paper to trace out on, and also PDFs come in different thicknesses for the most part of different paper. Don't be afraid to press paper, it is okay, which I'm going to do now. I have still left it on the 3/4 heat setting here, and they're starting to press out. Flip it over. Also you can spread your squirt spray on the water tank, and that also will help eke out some stubborn creases. Now I have tissue paper here, which I have taken out of one of my big pattern company's pattern envelope, and it is already pressed. I'll go over and show you that I did press it, so no worries about pressing tissue. You don't have to actually put your iron directly on the tissue paper or regular paper, PDF paper, or even the fabric. If you have a pressing cloth, you can also put your pressing cloth over everything that I have just suggested and press. You will still get the same desired results. With the already freshly pressed gingham fabric and the tissue paper, I am now going to, as best as I can accurately, lay that on the fabric, and I am going to get my pattern weights. These little chook pattern weights I made myself, so I am going to place these little guys on my pattern piece here. Now I'm quite happy having my little weights there. Some people like to use pins on their own, and some people like to combine both, have pattern weights and pins, because sometimes when you place your pin in your fabric, ever so slightly, if you put the pin in and it's at an angle, that will also slightly shift the fabric. So sometimes if you have a pattern weight and you place that on top, there's no shifting around of the pattern piece on the fabric. Sometimes some people like to go around their pattern pieces with a marker. So just off camera, I have also gone around my pattern piece. If I just zoom in for you guys, you can see the line going around the piece there. I am now going to cut around my pattern piece. Righto, I have now cut that out. Take my little chooks off. You can see there that I have cut it out. Now my scissors that I use, very inexpensive, and if you look at the shape of them, you think, oh, they're not too bad. Now some scissors, you see where the handle comes up a little bit, and then the blades there are nice and flat. Some scissors, their handles come up a lot higher, which is a really good thing, because sometimes when you put your scissors under a piece of fabric, so I've got a little bit here that I cut off, if you lay your blades flat down and then go to snip, depending on, if I slightly angle it, depending on the angle of the blades to where they associate with the handles, you're actually lifting the fabric up. So if I zoom in a little bit there, that fabric is lifting up slightly because of the handles and my knuckles on my fingers. So in effect, you are ever so slightly moving the fabric as well. So the handles on some scissors that you can purchase, they're a little bit higher, and because of that it compensates, and then the scissor blades lay flatter and your hand is a little bit more upright, and therefore you're not raising the fabric up as much, and you can get a little bit of a more of an accurate cut because the blades stay down and not lift the fabric up. So I'll remove my little chooks, and as you can see there, that is pretty accurate, and you can a little bit see the line. I'll talk about that at the end, about marking lines. I am now going to put this piece to one side, and we are going to cut out the exact same piece on the linen fabric, but this one has been left creased. Now sometimes some people, I know this is accentuated a little bit, the creases here, but again this is for demonstration purposes, but sometimes we do have like a couple of creases in fabric and they're not too much, and sometimes we're finger pressing them and trying to squish everything down, and then we come along with our pattern piece and lay it on top and things like that. Now because this little pattern piece here is also nice and flat, sometimes we leave them a little bit crinkled like this. So what I will do is use the crinkled tissue on the crinkled fabric. So I've laid that on top. I am now going to add my little hens there and do exactly the same as what I have previously done to the gingham fabric. Right, the linen is now all cut out. Next, I will bring back Ms. Gingham and introduce Miss Gingham to Mr. Crinkle Linen. G'day, how are you? Yeah, I'm alright, mate. What are you doing? You're looking really smooth today. You're looking really crinkly. Now, all joking aside, nice beautiful pressed fabric here. Now where this one had been left crinkly, if you just simply lay that on top, even straight away, you can see that it appears smaller. Look how much gingham is around there. Now even if, and I'm really pushing on this and smoothing that out with finger pressing, there is still a lot of gingham around all the edges there, and that is because obviously where fabric is creased, it kind of appears to have shrunk a little bit, as opposed to nice pressed fabric. It is pressed out, is laying beautifully flat, and therefore you would get more accuracy. If I bought these two together, we know they are the same pattern piece. If I was adding those two shoulder seams there, and the accuracy is quite a bit off. I will now press the linen and we will see what will happen after that. So I'm going to turn it up a little bit harder, and I'm going to spray it a little bit as well, so press out just a little bit quicker. And it's really lovely fabric to press, to be fair. Most fabrics are. A little bit of water again. You don't have to do this. And again, I already know that these fabrics are quite happy to have a high heat, and also happy not to have a pressing cloth. Again, it's personal choice to have a pressing cloth or not, but if you're starting out, perhaps use one just in case you do scorch your fabric. And what happens is you have like residue on the base of the sole plate on the iron, and then when you put your iron on the fabric without a pressing cloth, the scorched sole plate will leave a mark on the fabric. So if you use a pressing cloth, the mark or any marks would go on the pressing cloth and not your beautiful fabric. Righto, so the linen has now been pressed, and introducing Miss Gingham again. Now if we put the gingham on top, even straight away there, you can see that the linen fabric is now actually, after pressing it all, is bigger than the gingham. So if I zoom that in a little bit, you can now see a lot of that is now just a little bit bigger. And sometimes this is what happens when we don't always press our fabrics or tissue paper, PDF paper, or the paper that we use to trace out on. You will get slight differences in sizing, and also depending on whether you use pattern weights or pins. I'll quickly demonstrate putting the pins through the fabric and how sometimes that shifts the fabric. Just off camera, I have drawn on some lines there just to help so we can see where I insert the pin. So if I lay this line across this line here, put it about there to make sure it runs on the same length there. Then you would take your pin and we would carefully lift up the fabric. Even just doing that, sometimes it does move it. Again, you could also periodically put pins around to help so that doesn't shift. So you would pick your fabric up and you would then place your pin ready, and just straight away there, just as you are starting to insert the pin, the fabric will ever so slightly disjoint itself, and that is because obviously the pressure that you're putting the pin in, no matter how gentle, it still has to touch the fabric first before it pierces through the fibres. So if you come in there and you put your pin in and then bring it to around the back and then back through to the front, and then if I lift that up, that line there is not very straight. So the little trick is just quickly remove the pin, make sure the fabric is straight and that line is level there. Instead of coming in at the side, kind of bring your pin a little bit more upright. So pick your fabric up and then come in almost from above and then piece the fabric, bring it around the back, piece it to come back out, and that is more straight there. The pin head is actually covering, but it is a lot more straight there, and it doesn't shift the fabric around so much. Going back to this lovely pressed fabric and showing you the pin piece. So if you lay that over there, making sure the grain line and everything is straight, you can see that's pretty much accurate on that one. Now if we take that off, take that out the way, reintroduce the linen. Now bear in mind we have pressed this now. Remember, it was crinkled. Cut it out on crinkled tissue, crinkled fabric. Now if you place the smooth pressed tissue paper back on this piece here, you can see it is inaccurate. So if I zoom in a little bit there, you can see along the right edges here and across the top there, and if I zoom out a little bit, bringing it up so you can see the bottom there in the raw edges there. So that piece is not accurate. So you would have to go back in with your cutting device, whether it's a rotary cutter or scissors, and clean up those edges so it's more accurate to that pattern piece. Now whether that pattern piece was tissue or PDF paper or paper that you use to trace out on, this now is a little bit bigger. Also the opposite effect. Now remember, if I scrunch this up again, if that was scrunched and it was left scrunched and you only smoothed it out with your fingers, imagine two pieces of scrunched fabric and you butted them up together. Again, you are not going to have quite as accurate a match than if it was two pieces of fabric that were nicely pressed, and then if you butt it up, say for instance on this as an example, that is a shoulder piece there, and you would want your shoulder pieces to lay accurately. So what I will do is press this again, clean up all the edges so it is the same size as the gingham. I have just pressed that off camera, and before I clean up the linen fabric, just so you guys do know, that is a little bit off there. So I'm now going to clean up all the edges on the linen fabric so it's more accurate to the gingham piece. Righto, let's see how good my cutting was. So I'll lay that on top. That is now more accurate if I zoom in as well. Nice clean edges there, all the way around, all along the bottom. We now know that these pieces have been cut accurately due to the pressing. They are butted up, ready to stitch, and some people would then pin that for extra security, but these two fabrics, whether you are cardon to cardon or cardon to linen or mixing up your fabrics, sometimes the more tricky fabrics like silk or chiffon, they are notorious for slipping, plus they're very thin and flimsy, but that's for a different story altogether. But these two fabrics work really well together, and therefore they're not going to shift about, and also it's not a very long piece of fabric to stitch. So for me, I would leave that unpinned, and I would put that on my sewing machine and then stitch along the shoulder seam there at whatever desired stitching length required from the pattern, and I would know that those two pieces are accurate and therefore there's no excess fabric anywhere. Now if there was, let me ever so slightly move that. See what I mean? It doesn't move so easily, so it's really good fabrics. If for whatever reason there is a little bit of fabric, all you would then need to do is just true the fabric up. But again, bear in mind, by doing that you are altering, even if it's just by a mil or two, the size of your pattern pieces. So your pattern pieces ideally need to be as accurate as you possibly can get them. Righto, we have 4 marking tools here. We have a coloured pencil here, a regular leaded pencil there, a marker pen, and a thin tip liquid pen here. Off camera I have just used the marking tools and permeated the fabric here. So the one on the end there is the pencil, next in is the marker pen, but on its side so it would have been the thinner side there, and then I used the thick side of the marker there, and you can see the difference. Next up is this liquid pen. If I take the cap off, you can see how teeny tiny that is, so it gives a much thinner line there. And the other is a purple colouring pencil there, which was that line there. Also with the regular lead pencil, depends how sharp you want your point. So here it is very sharp, so the sharper it is, the thinner the line. Now I'll lay the pen piece as if I was tracing out the shoulder seam. So there is the shoulder seam. If I'd laid that on the fabric and use that thick marker there, or the colouring pencil, or the liquid ink, or the thinner side of the marker pen there, finally the pencil, so whichever I wished to use, I would have drawn the lines as if that each was the shoulder lines, and then it's come to cutting. Now if you are just beginning out in your sewing journey, for the most part you would cut perhaps along this line here, the edge there, and on the thinner ones again you would probably cut so you see your lines still on the fabric. Now I have exaggerated this, and this is purely just for demonstration, but if I did cut along the edge here, you can start to see, when you start to realise that is now actually given extra fabric. So your pattern piece, where you would have laid that on your fabric and then marked it, look how much extra you have of your fabric there. So you would have to go in and recut that to make sure it is the size of the pattern piece. Now with the thinner marking tools, if you place your scissors over the lines and then cut, I'm literally just going down the middle of the colourful crayon one there, colouring pencil rather, and again there is still a little bit of ink there. Next I'll cut down the liquid line, which is pretty much the thinnest of them all, making sure I put my blades on that line and then cut along and there you've pretty much cut it off, but there is a tiny amount, barely noticeable, but that is a lot more accurate. And again, doing the same there. Now if you actually cut, forget about that, I just folded that out of the way so nobody would get confused. If you cut slightly to what would be my left on this orange line, cut along there, keeping your scissors and blades on that line as much as you can, but actually cutting it off and the marker pen stays here, and then you know there's no marker pen on the fabric, which means that is more of an accurate cut and therefore is not displaying any excess fabric that you would have to then trim off and cut off and things like that. Now I know with serging and things like that you can also kind of true up some of your raw edges that way, but if we don't have serges and things like that yet at the early stage, having excess fabric, mismatched cut fabric, or if the fabric is shifted, and or if you haven't pressed the fabric or the pattern piece, you are going to get a little bit of excess fabric. Now imagine that on all of the pattern pieces on your fabric, and then if you laid all your pattern pieces from your original tissue and or traced out paper or PDF paper and lined it all up. And also bear in mind it's exactly the same as when you trace out or cut out the lines on your PDF and or traced out patterns. If you actually cut away the tracing lines or the lines that have been printed on the PDF, if you do cut your PDFs, therefore you're not adding paper to when you go to lay it on your fabric, because then if you're then marking your fabric with a marker instead of just cutting around it, if you would placed pattern weights on there or pins, again just shifting that fabric or having it ever so slightly 1 or 2 mil a little bit out of sync, you are going to get a little bit of extra fabric. So imagine if this was your lines that you had traced out from, say, your PDF, or your PDF which obviously has the printed lines on. If you then had cut out and left your line there on your pattern piece, and then for some that then also like to mark their fabric, the line would get bigger and bigger, and then the fabric pieces would be just that teeny tiny bit bigger from the original pattern piece. So just to round up, pressing is a really good thing. Now, as much as sometimes we don't like pressing in our ordinary everyday lives, doing the laundry and then putting the clothes out on the clothesline to dry, and then sometimes you have to do the ironing, and yeah, some people don't like doing that. But with sewing and things like that, especially quilting, you need the accuracy to help with the points when you are joining raw edges together. And the same with darts. If you have darts on a garment, you would want to make sure that all your seam allowances and everything match up, and especially with fabrics that you need to pattern match. Again there, if something is just slightly out of alignment, that will skew, say for instance, matching gingham squares, or I don't know, if you've got a flower in the petals and you want to match the petals might just be a little bit out of alignment. Righto, so I am going to turn the camera around and speak to you guys. Righto guys, that is it for Tip Time Tuesday this week. I hope you have enjoyed it. I know for most of us we already know these little tips and tricks, but sometimes, depending on how long we have been sewing, they kind of fall by the wayside. Sometimes we get into little bad habits, and also forget that there are new people always starting a new craft and or sewing. And for those, I hope that you have enjoyed these little tips and tricks that you have seen today. Have a really good week everybody, and happy sewing. Take care, and I will see you guys on Sunday.